Gary, let me go to you. I wonder if you have, and maybe this is a way to also prepare our participants. I wonder if you, based on the 5 impressive, dynamic, visually illustrated presentations we've had, if you have a thought or two with respect to community-led transformation or transformation emerging from within the community. And I think then if the participants wish, what if we went to each one of them briefly, maybe for 30 seconds, if they wish to comment on something that they heard before we move on to the next round. So Gary, I invite you.
Yeah, I'm so struck by the, but partly by what's not said, and that is how you, I don't think I'm privileged enough to say we yet, because of the way the community has taught you about yourself, and in the work of evoking community power, I didn't hear as much as I expected about how the community has empowered you, how the power of the community has literally flowed into your life. Now Carmen's was the one story, or Michelle, I'm sorry, was the story in which you sort of led with coming home and what that meant to you, how the community blessed you. But I suspect the leaders who are trusted by the community are those who the community sees being transformed by being part of the community.
Rashida, I wonder if you would respond to the invitation that Gary has extended to perhaps talk about how you've been transformed in the process, please.
Yeah, I really appreciate you raising that point, Gary, because that is something that we consistently keep in our, our narrative when we talk about empowerment, that we're not in a place to empower people. We are all learning in this ecosystem that we work in together, and we are being empowered as much as anyone else, to understand the wisdom of the folks who we are working with, to also understand the importance and the direct needs of the work beyond the studies, the theories, the data that may show the needs on a larger scale, more public health level, but we are working on the ground level, and we are also able to transform, ourselves and learn how this work is really relatable and how to make it relatable to people we work with. So I think it's very important that we don't centralize the work just around who we are and what we're doing as the important part of the work, but to know that we're collectively working with each other. So we have a model that we call, we use the community health ambassador model. And that model is so important to us, in addition to working directly with stakeholders and leaders and are just people who are living their lives, to reflect on how we formulate our programs, how we plan our systems, and how we make decisions on moving forward. That area of communal decision-making as well as transparency in our approaches is very, very important to ensuring that this is a sustainable projects that we're doing. If I always, say if I'm not here, if, someone who works in the programs are not here, how does this work continue? Because it's really not about us being in the space of power to make the work happen. And that's the difference between being in a place of power and being empowered and empowering each other. So I do appreciate that.
I think in Gary's invitation and Rashida, your response, as leaders, one is looking at not just who I am, but whose I am, and that the magic flows in all directions. Let's open the floor to any of our other colleagues, I don't necessarily need to go in any order, if they wish to take Gary's invitation or based on what they've heard, I wish to make a brief comment. And silence is good. It's go ahead, Carmen.
I mean, there are a couple of themes that came up that I think are really critical. And one, I think is for us to talk about systems of oppression and power dynamics very explicitly, since we're explicitly talking about power. GAVA began as a place-based childhood obesity intervention, very much inspired by some of the work of the California Endowment, looking at zip codes being greater predictors of health outcomes than genetic codes. And one of the brilliant people who I'm lucky to have on my board, who grew up in Dove Springs in Southeast Austin, where our work began and is still largely focused, asked a really important question of the catalyst funders of this initiative, which was, when you say zip codes, what are you not saying? Why do certain people live in these zip codes? Why are there so many other elements, that they share? And why are we still focused on, even in a place-based initiative, we were still focusing on individual behaviors? What can we do to increase access in order for people to take care of themselves as individuals more healthily? Fortunately, the questions were there, the curiosity was there, and enough flexibility in the beginning of that initiative to really let it evolve to address more root causes. But after 5 or 6 years, we did spin off as an independent organization so that we could explicitly talk about power, so that we could explicitly talk about anti-racism in an intersectional way, but starting with race. And also, so that we could explicitly talk about long-term sustainability of our communities. Because if we can't protect people from the forces of the market that are devouring them, then what good are our, short and intermediate term health initiatives? Because our outcomes are longitudinal. We need people to be around. And so when we started asking those deeper questions, it was a lot harder to get funded as a place-based health initiative. We had to get really creative and really strategic, and we had to build power by galvanizing power across not just residents, but institutional partners too.
Thank you, Carmen. And maybe this is a reminder for those who are on this webinar, on this call. If you have any direct questions of the participants, please feel free to pose them so that we can include your voices in these conversations. What you remind us of, Carmen, is my friend Bobby Milstein, who was part of this Population Health Roundtable yesterday. He often talks about the notion of we grow in the direction of the questions we ask. And, that's so asking the right kind of questions, and also at the same time, asking oneself what is not being asked or what is not being said. Yeah, okay. Maybe invite others if they have anything else to add before we move on to sort of our next round. And yes, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I want to respond what Gary said, that when we started the church, we got around the church a lot of checkpoints. I mean, and our people don't have a license. And the police stop in the neighborhoods, and the police know that people don't got a license. And I say, well, what I can do? And we do a lot of partnerships with different organizations to move the checkpoints. And 6 months we move away the checkpoints. And Moses tell God what I do. And God tell Moses, you need to go. How? Because I am. And my journey, I gotta transform myself, change myself, because I see that community need us, not need me. need us, need coming strong together. I mean, doing smart partnership, doing a lot of relationship. I mean, as people is in the dark side, and we need to build a bridge to bring to the light, because a lot of people still in the dark side and sorrowful, pain, and we need a build a bridge to bring to the light. And like I don't know, maybe you guys know it's the visa use for any hate got abuse, and the police don't cut it off the time to apply to the visa, and a lot of people, got returned. Well, you not apply, and we start a relationship with the chief police and extend to 5 years to can apply. And what I want to say is that myself is a change because the people need a sun change. And I change the journey, be close to the people, be close to the need, be close. What the people need is what I need. What the people cry is what I cry. It's what the people show you, I show you. I think that this come to respond what I already say a little bit.
Christine and Michelle, anything on your minds briefly?
Can share. I mean, one thing that came up for me is just thinking about, how I've been transformed by this work. And I think one of the things that's the most inspiring is actually seeing young people as well as people who have lived in Long Beach for their whole lives start to understand how power moves in Long Beach, how decisions are made, and how they can be part of that, how they can kind of, organize and impact power and actually be empowered themselves. And I feel like, especially with the youth organizing that's happening, I just think about, what I knew or didn't know about power when I was growing up. And I just feel like you can't unlearn that once you learn how decisions are made and how your voice matters in that, that it's not just, things are the way they are because they've always been that way and I can't do anything. I feel like that's the most empowering thing that I've seen. And, to Carmen's point, I also have really seen the power of using health as a through line for discussing inequities. And we've definitely done the work to be more explicit about race and class over the years. And that's become a really important part, not only of the California Endowment's work and building healthy communities, but as Long Beach Forward emerged to be its own organization, we explicitly talk about race and class or race and income, not determining one's future in Long Beach and organizing around that. And so I just think that, health has been a powerful through line. And if you only talk about health, you are missing really like Carmen was saying, okay, well, why is it that people in these zip codes, are experiencing these health inequities? And it's really has to do with our racist policies of redlining, of, all of kind of the practices that have created the communities that we have. And it's not just Long Beach, it's throughout our nation.
So we've had some questions I want to get to, but first, Christine, tell me about the t-shirt.
Oh, yes. So I figured because we were talking about transformational narrative, I would wear a shirt that, kind of embodies that. So schools, not prisons. And then I'm going to show at the bottom, it's just schools.
Oh.
Yeah. And so the idea, hashtags are a really important part of narrative these days. And, but also having a vision for where you're moving. So there's schools, not prisons. It's really about highlighting, that we're, focusing on prevention, focusing on positive education, and then moving just towards schools. So
I'm feeling really bad about my blue sweater.
Yeah, come on. No.
Michelle, do you have anything to add? We have some questions already coming in if you wish to address. I wonder if in your commentary you could talk a little bit about what's the difference between community engagement and community power from your perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just really about the transformative work, that race at the center of this work has been an evolution, especially in our area where talking about race is like, well, why? That we keep getting these questions and it's almost disbelief. It's hard for a lot of people in our community to see it right away. And it's not because it's not there. It is there. The inequities are there. The systems have been built to not see it. And what's been powerful in this, because it is community engagement, there's a traditional way of like, oh, we're going to go out, we're going to talk to a lot of people, we're going to invite a lot of people, and the improvement is, and your goals are set around how many people did we reach, and these surveys, but it's all transactional. And the difference with when we're talking about power is that it's transformational. And when we do actually go listen to a community, it's at the level of, we're going to sit in the mother's home in Klamath, in a small community on the tribal reservation, and we're going to hear what's going on for her life. And when we want to learn about literacy or how do we help kids read, we need to understand her life experience and her child's life experience. And we need to walk with her and then co-design those solutions together. And that's where that empowerment comes in. Because it isn't about us telling her what we're going to do or these are the interventions to fix your life. It's a whole system of oppression that was built around her to keep those barriers. So she wouldn't have access to preschool. She wouldn't have access to healthy food and transportation and all those other things that enable her to make those choices and say, my child is going to read and my child will be successful.
My child is going to read. Schools, not prisons, all the way to schools. Gary, do you want to?
I wanted to pull Rashida out because the very symbol of your work is so profound, and I'm hoping you could talk to us a little bit about what you have learned about power as health. Not just power for health. In other words, you could talk a lot about, well, an empowered community is more likely to be able to mobilize people to get vaccinated. So it's sort of power to make possible health. But what I hear in your story, when we very first met by Zoom, it seems to be your organization understands that the expression of agency and energy and fullness is in and of itself health. Am I hearing that right? Or could you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, we made health the core part of our programming and our approach to our work. And I find that people don't think about themselves and their health as primary. Maybe a lot of people do. We just keep moving through life and we don't consider what impacts our quality of life, our longevity, propensity to get chronic diseases, how the disparities affect our we talked about our health outcomes, and so all of those things. I think health is core. I mean, some people say money is core, wealth is core, but all of those. I mean, our health levels or quality of health really is contingent on access. Do we have the resources to eat healthy foods or to live in an environment that doesn't cause stressors and trauma, that also can affect your biometric health, but also can affect your social and mental health and how you raise your family, the dynamic between yourself and your community and your family and your children. So, there's layers of ways that we could approach this. We started by looking at food and community. That was our first project, was a monthly marketplace in 2008. A few years after the community was just devastated by the Hurricane Katrina disaster. and people were coming together and engaging with each other. And so the health component was definitely having a farmer stand, but the health component was people seeing each other and regrouping and communing and feeling hopeful, and seeing their neighbors and family and friends who they had, exchanging stories, sharing love. And that is what's really important. And when we say it's the core part of our approach to health, we have multiple projects that we do that impact like that hands-on, tangible health needs in our community around the environment. We're building this wetland park that is transforming 40 acres of green space that's been under-resourced, blighted, devastated, just neglected by our city, and taking leadership to transform that space into something that is beautiful and provides a healthy environment in so many different levels for people in community. We have another capital project we're building, which is a fresh market space that is going to also offer a learning kitchen on our small street, in our neighborhood. It used to be a commercial space, and many opportunities for revitalization of the community. People who can develop and own their businesses. Used to be a business space, and that's supporting health. That's supporting people being empowered to be able to learn and develop their skill sets into having their businesses, transform vacant and blighted land into a commercially viable space that supports community richness. Many different ways that we're approaching, what health means, health outcomes.
Thank you. So there may be some others who would answer this in a slightly different way than you. It's very common in public health and healthcare to describe communities like yours as being underserved. Mm-hmm. They're not served enough. You haven't received enough. Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing in your language is a little different than that. You're under-liberated. Mm-hmm. Get your knee off our neck and mm-hmm. we'll do the food. Get your knee off our neck and we'll figure out the diabetes. Mm-hmm. And so this seems to be a critical message that can only come from people doing community power to change the language with which privileged organizations of health describe your community. So I'm wondering about that served versus liberated language.
Right, we don't use that term either. We definitely are under-resourced. We have natural resources. We don't have the resources coming in that we should have. We don't have equitable resources. We're talking about zip codes. If you go a few miles into another part of the city, it's another world. It's unbelievable. It's insane the way our community has been so neglected and have not gotten the resources that should be in our spaces.
Well, thank you again for bringing to our attention the importance of language and the realities that it helps create. I wonder, Gary, should we move to sort of seamlessly to the part of our conversation where we are talking about struggles and travails, and I wonder if you want to set the container by talking about the short arm hoe.
Well, actually, I've noticed there's some questions that have come in, and one of the ones I want to bring into that heart of the question. So this is from someone who works in a state health department, and with a spirit of curiosity that, they say, frankly, we're new to funding place-based initiatives in communities where they actually have the goal of improving health equity, reducing health disparities, but by using the state power to bring together federal funding streams. And so they're actually in a position to rearrange how funding flows to the community. But they don't want to violate trust or show up in a domineering manner in that process. So they actually do have big league power. It'd be easy to misuse that power and crush the community in the process of helping it. could you give any guidance if the state health department actually does want to do the right thing? Could you talk a little bit about where you've seen it happen in the right way? That's open for everybody to respond to.
Okay, I'll jump in here. So first off, investing in time and resources into listening, deeply listening with community, and that those solutions are going to come up from the community. If you come in with your favored solution off the bat and say, here's the 3 things we're going to do, you're going to lose a lot of people, and it's not going to have the same impact as the community coming around to identify what those what the problem is, as well as then what the solutions are to change that. And the other thing I'll say is that there is a lot in this where communities, especially so for rural and tribal, it's a pattern of being done to. And often access to data is another piece of this that we don't often talk about, that we're invisible because we are undercounted in a lot of ways, both through census and that to the resources, to the funding, but also access to actually be able to talk about what's happening in our community. And so the power of doing both qualitative and quantitative data collection and marrying those two together is really, really critical to understand why something is happening, at the same time getting better data that you need to overspend in these smaller communities to really get good data. And it's not good enough right now on state levels.
Anybody else have any guidance about engaging a health system that actually wants to do the right thing but doesn't know how to do the right thing?
Yeah. What comes up for me is, this is kind of, might be hard to hear, but give up control and a sense of control of what exactly it's going to look like to fund work around health inequities. Find organizational partners who have been doing community organizing work and working on these issues to fund, and find partners who, it's really hard. I just want to say it's a very hard thing for government to do, because often government is the target of change. And so I just want to be really clear with that. It's like, yes, you have these resources, and I absolutely commend, anyone who's looking at how to drive those resources to community change. It is going to achieve true community change and not to do damage. It's going to have to require a certain level of giving up of control, of trying to control the whole process of what that looks like, or trying to be the core leader. And so thinking as like a funding partner, thinking as, okay, we have the resources, now you do your job. And I think, having that be really invested in organizations that have shown that they are connected to grassroots communities, not just kind of the usual suspects too, because a lot of times government, the way the systems work, it's like easier to give it to one large organization or one statewide body or, countywide body or whatever. But in order for resources to truly reach the communities that are organizing at the grassroots level and experiencing the health inequities the deepest, we have to find models to kind of be more creative about getting resources to those communities, and letting the communities define, what success looks like. And I know that can happen in different parameters. So it's also, if you really want to transform health inequities, a focus on policy and systems change is very important. So those are a few of my key learnings. I would say we've been engaged in different government partnerships in kind of different ways and seen them play out. And those are some of the learnings that I have gleaned from it.
So I'm curious whether there are some communities that just don't have a shot. As a community organizer, you realize this is just never going to work. Pick up and go somewhere else. And there's some governments that it's just never going to work. So I'm a little curious about how you titrate, how you triage your own investment of your life. Not, I was going to say time, but it's actually your life and energy in these different things. But Daniel, did you have something to say earlier on in the earlier point? I feel like we may have skipped over.
Yeah. When we doing my first screen in the church, it's an old man. The numbers, cholesterol and sugar, go really high. I mean, I can remember how much, and we need to call the ambulance. We called the 911 and sent to the hospital. And I talked with the doctor right there. I said, well, we need to do something because it's probably a lot of people is like, yeah, and don't know. And I started building relationship with Wake Forest, no one, and health department. And now I find the health department got many research in our county, but not in our language. And so you see this T-shirt right there, that T-shirt is the health department. And I doing the life coach program for pre-diabetes. And I give you classes every Monday to the people. And I say, and also we doing the flu shot, for free. I mean, I think that the counties, all the county or the government got a lot of resources, but Matthew 7:7 say you need to shut the door. Who shut the door, the God gonna open, right? And I think that I got many resources in our communities. Probably sometimes it's not really what we need, but something we can help. And this is what I want to share, Gary, because all the partnership we got in Forsyth counties are really good. Wake Forest, no one, and health department provide a lot of resources for our community.
Well, and we usually do that because Daniel knocks on our door. We're the door he knocks on. He doesn't like directly knock on Jesus' door. He often knocks on a hospital or a public health door with the authority of Jesus.
I wanted to respond to your question, Gary, because I was a little bit quiet in the beginning, just being here in the Lone Star State, and thinking about the number of decisions that are made about health and education related resources that are beyond our municipal control. I also live in a city that attempts a lot of what are often thought of as progressive policies, and we face a lot of backlash politically from our state as a result. And so because of that, our organizing has to be very grassroots and very proactive on the local level of what we can do, where we can interrupt these systems and create exactly that kind of just and healthy community that we want to see, while also building and strengthening our networks of other people across the state and across the region. We're dealing with increasing climate shocks and stressors and the intersection with health equity there. And that affects the entire I-10 corridor. So there are certain things that if Harris County around Houston can actually push, and we can push alongside and take it out of the political football and into, actual efficiency of resources, we might be able to achieve some gains in this pandemic. But generally speaking, it has been difficult. And in more rural communities where there aren't thousands of nonprofits and there aren't the same municipal political structures, I always tell people you're back in your community centers, the elders in your community who have been, the people who've been taking care of kids, the schools, the churches. You're going to have to build it from there up and then network across. Because I can remember, 10 years ago about this time, I was organizing in elementary schools around coordinated school health, an unfunded state mandate, with teachers and parents trying to get more resources. And we were in the midst of massive teacher cuts. I mean, to walk into a campus where people are just devastated because 20 of their colleagues just got laid off, or, you know, the beginning of last year, before the pandemic hit us in the States, our state had just launched a new regulation unit out of the health department to actually root out unlicensed childcare providers, who are the majority of the childcare providers in our neighborhoods, with whom we're constantly working to ensure better nutrition and physical activity for these kids for longitudinal health outcomes. You know, so these were the kinds of things where we started saying, you know, at what point are we just defending the very spaces and environments? You know, you talk about gentrification. It used to be about how can we make this school the healthiest environment possible. Now it's how can we keep this school from closing? You know, so at the risk of burning the candle at both ends, you know, we've had to really recalibrate and have very real systems level conversations. The last thing I'll just say is I think in recent times, I've appreciated that the talk isn't cheap. These conversations are really critical because they are the mental model shifts that allow us to fund the work that we actually need to do, which is so often the last work to be funded.
Arvind, we got some great questions. Why don't you pick one of them and flip them out?
Certainly, Gary. And, you know, if I may just serve as a bit of an interlocutor between what we've heard from our various participants, as well as what I'm seeing in the comments and the questions. There was somebody who said that not everything that counts is countable, and not everything that's countable counts. And I guess the question that is being posed is who decides what counts and what is countable. And we are hearing that there is tremendous power in the determination of what is countable. You know, could come from the community if indeed there is deep listening. I mean, these are some of the themes that I am seeing in the comments. I'm going to pose this question. It begins by saying so much of the discussion of COVID response has been, you know, criticism of the top-down federal health response as being insufficient or ineffective or inconsistent, you know, as if we need a much more stronger top-down approach. I wonder, is it possible that the reverse is true? That communities were not well resourced and trusted to develop their own responses. And, you know, I just sort of offer that in the spirit of echoing a sentiment that's been expressed in our comments and questions, and which of course speaks deeply to the issue at hand. And I think, you know, if anybody wishes to have a go at it, please.
At the risk of taking up too much talking space, I'll just comment quickly on countable things. I'm super excited about a community-driven evaluation framework that we're in the midst of creating for GAVA's work now and over the coming years. As a place-based childhood obesity intervention, we inherited a very cool 5-year longitudinal set of public health studies that looked at access to healthy food, physical activity, and community readiness to take on some of the barriers to access to those things, and utilization. So healthy behaviors in the neighborhoods. Mostly great outcomes, troubling child BMI data, and a lot of omitted variables. 2 catastrophic floods that hit the area during that period of research, a lot of increasing economic stressors, and a variety of other things that we knew we needed to address and evaluate. So we're now looking at a community-driven set of evaluation indicators around health, the environment, and demographics, and working with colleagues at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, data partners, at how do we look at survey data around these things, both in randomized samples and the people who are close to our coalition, close to our efforts, and what are the relations and multiple regressions for the data nerds? You know, how are these things interconnected? We have assumptions about neighborhood stability and the social cohesion that helps you be healthy and withstand disaster. But we want to look deeper, challenge those assumptions. How do people in the same zip code feel of different racial backgrounds? You know, when it comes to safety, when it comes to police interactions, all of these different things have intersections with the, you know, healthy food, physical activity, and neighborhood stability. So by allowing community to set the conversations, I think I said this in our first meeting, which was, I think health equity's gotten pretty far in understanding that the people who experience the impacts are the key to creating the solutions. But I think we need to go even a step further and actually allow impacted communities to identify the problems that we're actually solving for.
So if I can, I want to follow up on that. Imagine that the four of you were visiting the other one's neighborhood. You probably wouldn't show up and say, give me your spreadsheet, you know, of indicators. You would probably, as a community organizer, someone who knows power, you would notice things. And so I'm playing off the word measuring, counting, versus systematically noticing, kind of like an artist notices. They don't count the palette, they notice the palette, and then they use it. So if the four of you were to visit Michelle's community, I'm curious about the discipline you would bring to noticing what's going on there. Still different than counting. Is it better than counting? I don't want to make it not useful. That might have been too artistic.
I would just want Michelle to take me on a tour of those beautiful, beautiful natural places.
Yeah, that's where I'm going.
And hear some stories.
Same. I think about when we kind of show people what Long Beach looks like. One of our environmental health collaboratives developed a toxic tour because environmental health is a huge issue in Long Beach, and you know, would take people through the ports, through the different neighborhoods. And so, I mean, something I notice is, you know, what are the different neighborhoods, kind of what are the spatial, you know, how are people related to them, who lives where, what kinds of jobs do certain people do? Those are the kinds of things that I notice when I go places and highlight to people. I know I also had an opportunity to show some people around Long Beach. They were visiting for a sociology conference, and I took them all around. And then we ended up in Naples, our very wealthy community in Long Beach. And I highlighted, okay, in this neighborhood, we have a 19% unemployment rate. In this neighborhood, we have a 2.6% unemployment rate. And just kind of highlighting not just so it's like what it looks like, what it feels like, the context, but also the story behind it and why it's like that. And why is this a dividing street? Why do people say don't live above 7th or live over here, you know? And those are kind of the history of our community that has made it look a certain way.
Yeah, if we were going to bring you up for a tour, we would do two different things. We put you on a bus and we put you on a boat. So on the bus, we would be taking you around to some of the different community centers and places where we've seen growth and the garden spaces and where you can see the vitality of what people can make possible. We'd also take you through neighborhoods where you can see some of the disinvestment and as Christine has talked about, the difference between street to street. But the reason we would take you on a boat is to take you be 45 minutes up the river in a road that takes us 2 hours over a gravel hill to get there to the Upper Yurok Reservation. And in that place, it's really centering to understand that we still have a one-lane highway funded by the state. That's a state highway, but it's a one-lane falling off the cliff road to get there. And the level of that the school just got power 2 years ago, that they operate on a generator. The level of disconnection and disinvestment from a lot of our institutions. And the other thing I'll say with that, because there was a point you had made earlier, and I thought both between federal and local level of like why there's a role for both, there really is. It's a both and. For any of this work, we have to have, we all have to step into the power that we have. We can't say the federal government doesn't have power and all, it's just grassroots community and that's where we're building it. We all have a responsibility and a power, and it's about how we leverage it and work together across that. And the community determines what those problems are that we want to work on. And then we set those goals of what do we want to measure and work towards, because it's about what we're learning on that journey. And then, oh, what happened here? Why didn't we get to that outcome? Okay, what do we want to do about it? What do we want to change? And it's always a progression and an evolution of that work. It's not a one and done measurement.
Michelle, I want to be on that bus and on that boat. Gary didn't ask me what I would show you, but I take you to the parking lot of Walmart, and the image that you see behind me is the Grand Candela, the Grand Candle, which is a memorial for the 22 people who died. It's made up of 22 arcs. They all shine light. And of course, the most important thing is that the light traverses across the border and is visible to all. So Gary, I think we have about 8 or 9 minutes. And I wonder, do we want to go where the short arm hoe takes us?
Yeah, the what Arvind's alluding to, and we talked about a little bit, were the symbols of power that remind us of those who found a way before ours. And it came from when my wife and I and some friends were in Phoenix looking at community-based organizations for health. It's sort of the title of the workshop. And we happened to come in, and the person we thought we were going to meet with wasn't there. We ended up meeting with a younger sort of deputy who had not been in the organization when it was founded. He was not part of the birth story of this organization, but he had been integrated into the culture and flow of the story that was not his to tell as if it had been his to start. And this was an organization that Cesar Chavez, as part of the Cesar Chavez ecology of organizations that came out. And I asked him, how in the world were they able to achieve such extraordinary bodies of work in Phoenix today? He was working in mental health. He said, well, you know, organization was really founded with the union organizing around trying to outlaw the short-handled hoe that broke the back of so many thousands of farm workers. And, you know, they figured out if they could break the short-handled hoe so that it wasn't legal to do that anymore, anything else would be easier. Well, he was still telling that story as if he had done that. But somehow that very powerful image that everything we have to face today is easier than the founders faced. And so maybe we can find our agency to do this harder work. It was so striking how that story lived, and I mean, it was empowering. He was like accountable. Quit whining. I'm not fighting the short-handled hoe. I mean, it was just extraordinary beauty. But I'm curious about whether there are any images that are like that in your work that encourage you that the challenges you're facing today are maybe not as hard as some of the founding challenges. Now, some of you are founders, but
whoever wishes to go, and you know, maybe we can do about 30 seconds to a minute per person.
I mean, I'm a second generation organizer, and I grew up, you know, right in the galvanizing point of the environmental justice movement, and so I was fortunate to be given the leadership development in oral history to learn that low-income communities of color with about $2,000 were able to organize and kick out 6 transnational oil companies from East Austin. I don't know of another case where that's true. And yet it gives me some kind of feeling of solidarity when I would hear about, you know, Nigerians and fighting battles with Shell oil, you know, across the Atlantic. So I think any struggle that I've encountered in the politics and the organizing, I have to remind myself that it's only possible because my elders and the people before me blazed a trail, and that people have done unthinkable things that nobody thought was possible.
Thank you for that, Carmen. Michelle?
Yeah, so mine is a little drawing of, this is the Donato girl. Back in 2009, she was drawn. And on her t-shirt, it says, "I love this place because I can make it great." And it was a vision, it was a dream of what maybe our community could do, that all of our young people could have the experiences of real meaningful work and connection to community, be connected to adults and peers, and have a set of she has a toolbox in her hand. And that toolbox is full of policy, advocacy, public speaking, being able to understand and analyze data, that our young people would be equipped with these skills, and that she'd have a map and a plan of how to get home, and that in her community, she could live and raise a family. And that these young people would experience making real positive difference in the community. And that was a dream that didn't seem possible when we did this. The young people I showed at the end of the intro, those, all of them are the embodiment of this vision. And for my 8-year-old daughter to be multiracial and to be able to see a trans youth host a county commissioner town hall, and to be on the radio talking about racial equity with the mayor in a rural conservative community, to be able to have those conversations and be out and real and honest about who they are, for a 22-year-old to be serving on city council, that is, it's real. And our young people are that. But it took people being able to sketch this idea of maybe we could do this. Maybe our young people could actually have dreams, and it's about hope. And it's so powerful, and it's something that connected to me because, again, I grew up always hearing that the narrative was that you have to leave this community to be successful. And that's not true.
Thank you, Michelle. I love this place because I can make it great. Christine?
Sure, I brought, this is an emoji sign that has a frowny face, angry face, and love. And this is something that we used at our People State of the City, which in recent years has attracted up to 500 people from our community. And it's an event that we created about 10 years ago. I was sitting in a living room talking about how the mayor, not our current mayor, but the mayor at the time, everything he said would undercut our work. And so one of the people in the room said, "Why don't we do our own State of the City?" And so 10 years ago, the People's State of the City was born. And this is just one of the tools that we've given people to express how they're feeling when we present information during the People's State of the City. But the challenge it represents to me is really the ability to define our own our own narrative and what is important in our community.
Lovely, Christine. The ability to determine our own narrative and have something to show for it. Danielle, and then we'll go to Rashida, and maybe in a minute each.
The only one I want to say that my dream, my hope is always bring the community together. No matter where I come from, no matter how feeling, bring the community together. And our church is open for whole community. No matter if you're member for the church or not, you my neighbor, you are my community. And we put a lot of power in education, we put a lot of power in health, and we put a lot of power in bring the family together too. You know, we got a lot of dysfunctional family, a lot of young people so lost it because don't know what to do. And our goal and our victory is that bring the community together, and the people can find a hope, people can find a healing, can find education, and can find a health. And we keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Pastor. Daniel, I've got goosebumps, and consistent with the theme of Sankofa and bringing it back the whole circle. Rashida, we go to you, and then perhaps Gary, you can close the session. Rashida. Rashida, we may need audio.
I actually brought two pieces. One is an image of my father and my uncle in front of the house they grew up in. This is after they returned. This is coming back to the neighborhood where they grew up in. What happened to the house after Hurricane Katrina. And this was a beautiful, I love this little house. My grandfather's house had these little cobblestone driveway, the driveway and little rose bushes. And it was just so beautiful. And when you look at the conditions of this neighborhood now, you would not know how lovely it was. The house is not even there anymore. There are numerous vacant lots. There's more vacant lots than homes. And people are held hostage by 12 feet of grass and blighted land, and they're not able to, it's not able to thrive as it should be. So it gives me hope though, in having this memory and seeing my father and my uncle and their love for their home. And the last, I'll close with, which really gives me that, the wetland park. This is the front entrance. So you don't see the grand beauty of the water and the wildlife in the park, but this is across the street from where my father lived. This is the neighborhood where they played as a child, as these children are playing in this area. And so this gives me hope when we have these programs where children can come and enjoy nature, be free, explore, love to see. There's an alligator out there. There's coyotes, there's rabbits. It's amazing that this is in a neighborhood and a place where wildlife and land and nature is flourishing, which my father, his brother, their friends, people who still live in this neighborhood have that memory. So that gives me hope, the memory and the life that lives in it.
Thank you, Rashida. We owe it to our ancestors. We heard Carmen talk about second generation organizer, a sense of history. And Gary, my friend, I hand it over to you to close this, as I personally thank all our participants on the screen, as well as those who've joined us. Gary, over to you.
Dangerous to give a Baptist minister the last word. This could go on for a while. I'll hold the sermon and let the image behind me sort of be the statement of what we mean by power. This is a picture done by Lisa Lum, my wife's twin sister, who painted it as, this is what God looks like. This is what the energy of the universe looks like. And so I love that it has all different places of worship where we come to humble ourselves before what we understand as the ultimate power. And then we walk out the door of those different places of worship to give our lives to creating the future. And, I love this as sort of as a picture of faith, the energy that is still expressing itself. You could also see this as a picture of science, that seems like every month, science gives us new tools, new tools to hope with, and new tools to imagine what's possible for our communities. So that's really what I think of. That's a picture of power for me. And what I've heard in the voices and lives of all of these panelists is extraordinary way that you have given your life to be a channel for power to flow through you, but also to join with the power of the community. I do hope we get to be on the ground someday with y'all. I would love to see the places you love through your eyes. I'll bet we'd learn a lot. So I'm going to hand it over. Thank you so much for your generous time.